making the schlep over here to me. We appreciate you doing that. My name is David Lucarelli, and I'm really excited to do this panel because I have a whole plethora of great comics creators here. And the way I like to work this is we'll kind of go down the line. Everybody will introduce themselves, let you know who they are, what they do, and then I've got a few questions for everybody, and then based on that, you guys can ask us some questions. Everybody that asks a question gets a bag of some free comics, and like that there. So starting, I guess, on the far end.
Hi, my name is Johnny Parker. I'm a comic writer. I produce Broken, Ewoks for Hobbits, because they are. Everybody knows me for National Rivals, and I'm on the project out this weekend called IQ.
My name is Dave Baker. I'm a writer and illustrator located in Los Angeles. My two most recent books are Halloween Boy, which is an action-adventure horror comic about a character who's cursed to be the patron saint of the impossible and help people out of no-win scenarios, and Mary Tyler Moore, which is a graphic novel hybrid about a guy 100 years in the future who's obsessed with a TV show no one remembers. And yeah, I wrote and drew both of them.
Hi, my name is Madeline Holly-Rosing. I am the writer-creator of the Steampunk Supernatural series Boston Metaphysical Society. My new series is Morgana and Dragon, and my most recent writing assignment was for Lady Mechanica, which is actually out right now, called The Mechanical Menagerie.
And I'm Edward Davis. I am the founder of Finish Line Comics, where my ongoing title is The Immortal Era, and I have a second title, Corruptor, and then I did a horror one-shot based on eye trauma that I experienced called Floaters that just came out most recently.
And I'm David Lucarelli, primarily known for Tinseltown, which is a period crime drama about one of the first female cops in Hollywood. Also, the Children's Vampire Hunting Brigade, which is a coming-of-age gothic adventure, sort of a punk rock movie set in Scotland. And most recently, Dr. Zombo's Ghostly Tales, which is a horror anthology that's kind of like DC Comics meets the Twilight Zone with a free ghost inside every issue. Anyhow, that's the cast of characters we have up here today. Two of you are teachers, Johnny, Edward. I wanted to ask you guys, they say write what you know. How has being a teacher informed what you do as a comic book writer?
I think it's part of your life. For me, I've been teaching now for 27 years, so it's going to incorporate its way into the writing. But I think more for me as a teacher, it's been trying to get kids passionate about reading those graphic novels and things like that, because when I first started my career, to find children's graphic novels was a lot more difficult, and now they're adapting Babysitter's Club and Goosebumps and everything, and just having these kids so excited about reading comic books, and of course they all want to read mine, and you know, they're adults only, so it's like, sorry guys, this is not for you. But just bringing a passion of reading, because I've had to battle with parents over and over again because they want them to be reading something high art. Like they want to drop Shakespeare into their fifth grader's lap, and I say, just get them passionate about reading and everything else will come with it.
For me, one benefit of teaching this material is allowing me to be a comic writer is this our time off. Like a lot of teachers I've taken careers are passionate at the summertime just to explore and whatnot. So part of the reason why I'm able to be in San Diego, I'm able to do books on a regular basis, is because teaching allows me that time off to like explore those passions. But then in addition to that though, like you gotta get better about the literacy aspect of it. Like my own classroom, I teach high school, 9th and 10th grade. So we actually study graphic novels like two wall and spinning. That was students like make their own comics, write essays about it, and do literary analysis, because it's a great bridge way. Because if you think about it, in elementary school we got picture books. But then all of a sudden we got middle school, you just have prose, and just novels with words in it. There's like no transition period. When you think about struggling readers and students like PEs or students who are like learning a second language, comics are a great bridge around because those pictures help the process to learn more. And so that's one of the ways I use my classroom to help students increase their literacy, but also be a bridge for them in the learning process.
Speaking of that, it reminds me there was a study the military did, right, where the most efficient way people learn things is through a combination of words and pictures, which is comics. So another thing is that three of you creators, at least, in addition to doing your own original projects, have also played with other people's toys. Dave, I know you did Star Trek, Godzilla, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Johnny, you've also done Godzilla. And Madeline, you have recently been doing, like you mentioned, Lady Mechanica in that universe. So I was wondering, one, how those opportunities came up for you, and also how you tailor your approach to writing those kinds of books versus your own original projects.
I can start. I guess Marcia Chan, who is Joe's co-writer, and I think she basically handles everything in his life, reached out to me. I'm not sure how she heard about me. I have no idea. I got an email saying, would you be interested in writing a Lady Mechanica? And the obvious answer is yes. And so how that came about is I said, okay, send me PDFs of all your stuff. I hadn't read Lady Mechanica just because I had been developing my own steampunk story and I didn't want it to influence it. So it wasn't because I didn't like Lady Mechanica, it was a more practical story development thing. So I read it, all the volumes, and realized there was some stories they had missed, they hadn't focused on the girls, and so I said, let me pitch you 3 stories. If you like any of them, then we'll go from there. Turns out they liked all 3, but one in particular, and so I got under contract. And Joe likes to, it's his baby. Lady Mechanica is his, and so whatever they want, I try to do as much as possible. They wanted it not in any kind of comic paneling because Joe does his own paneling, so I did it in screenwriting format, which fortunately I have a degree in screenwriting, so that was not a problem. And then anything like splash pages, page breaks were suggestions because this is, like I said, Joe's baby. And then after that it becomes we went back and forth with outlines for several months until I went to script. But it's one of those instances where you need to pick your battles. And it's only when I thought something that they wanted to do was really going to jeopardize the story that I would push back. And they would listen. Because I didn't, do this. What about this? What about this? What about this? It's like, okay, this, we can't do it this way because then X, Y, Z will happen. And I went like, okay, I get it now. And they're very protective, as they should be, of their IP. But yeah, for me, it was fine to be able to actually write a script and let someone else take care of production instead of project managing it myself.
For me, the way I started writing other people's characters was pretty directly tied to indie comics and self-publishing. I've been self-publishing since I was 18, and through the process of making my own books and going to conventions, I met editors, which is how I met people at DC and IDW, and it's a pretty straight line. It's a circuitous, long, frustrating line of, just need to follow up. I'm like, oh, by the way, did you? But in terms of the logistics of it, I self-published books, the editors liked those books, and they hired me to work on various projects.
Yep, same. An editor by the name of Josh Renner, a really editor and writer, she saw my book Broken. And when she read Broken, she kind of saw what I could do as a writer and like the vision of it. And then that's the thing about what David said, when editors see your work and they like it, they kind of recommend your work. She reached out to me and asked me when we got to it. And honestly, it was an interesting and fun experience. Because we work with a project like IP that's owned by someone else. You have to do 2 editors. So I went through my original IDW editor who read my script for the story or whatnot, but then I had to go to Toho to make sure everything was in line with what Godzilla is. And that led to some interesting experiences. In my book, I had Mothra, characters talk about Mothra and how she loves and cares for the human race even more than Godzilla. And the note I got back from Toho was Godzilla don't give a damn about us. It was okay, never mind. That's your nature, okay. And so it was really cool and it was a dope experience because again, you're being very protective of their IP, and you want to respect that, but you also learn a lot more things about the characters in the process.
The list they gave me for Godzilla was fascinating. That was honestly worth more than the money to me was like, they gave you a list of like 10 things that if you're gonna write something in the Godzilla universe, like, he can't do any human gestures. So like, he can never do a thumbs up, he can never lean, like, which I'm sure Godzilla fans out there are like, but he does that in the movies all the time.
Yeah.
I know, but like, apparently Toho is like, he can't do any of that stuff. And seeing that like behind the curtain weird list of bullet pointed things was just crack for me. I was like, I love this.
It's always so hilarious. Like random thing, like, what color is Godzilla? Great. He's great. Like, he's being green, but no, he's gray. So let's think when you tell the interpret is big green or something like that, oh, no, we're gonna shut that down.
Yep.
So it's just like all those little nuanced things you learn about, like the history and all the canon and whatnot. It's just like super fun.
Same thing with his breath, right? His breath is atomic breath, right? No, heat breath. He has, canonically in the comics and the ancillary media, there's no nuclear stuff. He has nothing to do with nuclear stuff. He's not a metaphor for nuclear annihilation. He's just a giant lizard guy and he does stuff. Yep, totally.
So another commonality that I noticed, I know that everybody up here has probably been on lots of podcasts, but Dave, Edward, you guys both do ongoing podcasts, and I've done one for a couple of years, Rock Album Analysts. It's not currently doing it, but that's how I discovered your work. Is listening to you. If you guys haven't heard the Deep Cuts podcast, and you love pop culture, it's not all about comics, but it is a fascinating deep dive. And I would suggest you start with an episode about Andrew WK, which will just blow your mind. But I wanted to ask you both about how doing those podcasts has helped promote your comics and creative careers.
I mean, I think it helps promote your comics in the fact that you're constantly networking with new people. You're meeting new creators, and I've found connections with people I'm going to work on with different books just by having them on my show. They come on and talk about their book or whatever. I just throw random topics at people because my thought about this podcast was I didn't want it to be the same interview questions that you get asked a million times. So I just have some random topics, let them talk about their books, and then after the show, you'll talk backstage with them. And I found people that, okay, let's collaborate. How about I work on an anthology with you? So just being on this show opens your world up, where before COVID, I just hid under a rock. I didn't get out there as much. I would go to cons, but COVID forced me out of that comfort zone and going on to other people's podcasts. And it's just a way of finding infinite great creators that are all looking out for each other. The indie comic community is so open, and people will share their wealth of information for you, and you'll just find so many great connections. And even at this show, I'm going and meeting people in the flesh that I've had on my show, and it's just great for connections and building your own comic world and helping build theirs.
Yeah, I agree with that. My podcast is a little bit more labor intensive, unfortunately. It's a deep dive explainer podcast about weird or obscure topics that we take way too seriously. So each episode we write a full script. Sometimes there's musical interludes. Sometimes we have guests who are the actual subjects of the episodes. Namely, like the guy who started the flat earth theory, or like the guy who invented Napster, or like all these weird people that have been kind of either glossed over or become weird, forgotten pieces of pop culture history. And I've made lots of really great friends through the process. But I think in terms of the marketing of the comics, I would say that it's actually less marketing of the comics and more having the comics be a byproduct of marketing you as a personality. Like one of the things that I find a little frustrating about the comics industry is that they don't make celebrities. Like publishers don't push people and put them in front and center. They push the characters typically. And also, let's be real, a lot of cartoonists are boring. But some of them are really interesting people, and they have really interesting stories and interesting personalities that could be used to monetize and promote the work further. And having that laboriously created, way too much effort podcast has definitely been a way to help showcase both my personality and my co-host Andrew Price's personality.
And when I talked to you earlier, you were saying that you're actually concentrating more on your YouTube channel. Andrew, what is, where can people find that?
Yeah, it's basically an outgrowth of the show. The YouTube show is called Mystery Treehouse, which is the fictional location that the podcast takes place in. And it's the same idea, weird or obscure topic explainers. We did one most recently about Sophia Stewart, who's a woman who claims that the Matrix and the Terminator films were stolen from her, which is a very interesting story because it has taken on a life of its own, where there are people who really believe that this is true. And I read the book, and she's very mentally ill. Like, she's just clearly mentally ill. Like, the book has not one, not two, not three, but four forewords. Like, it's a foreword, a preface, a beginning, and then the book starts, and it's 10 pages, and then the rest of it is legal documents. Like, it is wild. Yeah, I mean, I just am an obsessive, so I like doing a bunch of research and then telling people, like, hey, look at the weird stuff I found. The internet's a great place to do that.
So sometimes people ask me, like, well, should I self-publish my first comic? Should I go with an indie publisher? And I think it's a really loaded question because, finding the right indie publisher is the best thing in the world because it can totally amplify who you are and your sales and whatnot. But getting hooked up with the wrong one can actually hurt you. Unlike the book industry in which people sort of look down upon self-publishing, maybe not as much anymore, but they used to. I think in the comic book world, especially the indie world, nobody knows you can do anything until you've already done it. So if most people start self-publishing things, and then once powers that be at various companies see that you can tell stories and tell them well, they're much more likely to want to work with you. So Dave, your work, I think it's fair to say, some of it is fairly eclectic, kind of postmodern, meta, and it's great, but I'm amazed that you've been able to really consistently find the right publishers for your work that really understand it and promote it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. Like I said, I started self-publishing, and whenever anybody comes and says, how do I break into comics, I say self-publish, and they say, well, I don't want it self-published. Like, it's just the only answer. In my view, it's the only answer. Largely because, like David said, nobody knows you can do anything until you've done it, and also, most indie publishers' deals are terrible, and they will screw you over. And for me, those deals are very important. I'm a big fan of comics history. Siegel and Schuster sold Superman to National Publications in 1939 for $138, and come hell or high water, that's not going to be me. And I'm going to do my best to try and help my friends to not make those decisions. And I've had those conversations with people at 2 in the morning where they're crying, like, but this is all I ever wanted is a publishing deal. And I'm like, trust me, you don't want to work with these specific people. I know it says you own the copyright, but if you look under the media rights, it says they own 50%, which is really 51, and they won't pay you anything. You don't own this book. And I think therein lies the real question that you're answering, or you're asking, is like, how do you find people that want to put out weird, interesting things, find publishers that don't take media rights?
Yeah. And Madeline, you've done both, too, with the same property, right? And what's your experience been like?
I started out self-publishing, and then I was picked up by SourcePoint Press, which I had a very good relationship with. And they reissued the original 6 issues of Boston Metaphysical and the subsequent standalone sequels, and then did the first trade. And then I guess there was some financial problems with COVID and things like that. And after a while, you kind of see the handwriting on the wall. And they did stop printing so they weren't technically in, not breached, but once they stopped printing, I could get my rights back. The other thing is, get a good lawyer to look at these contracts. You absolutely, I actually completely rewrote the contract that I was given, because he just said, just give me what you want, tell me what you want. And I went like, hey, this is what I want. And I'm like, okay. And that's the kind of publisher you want. And so I did get, I gave them the right to print and distribute. They didn't have rights to the IP. I will never give those away. That's never going to happen. And so now I'm back to self-publishing, both Boston Metaphysical and new one. And I have some ideas in what I'm going to do next. But in that case, I did find a good independent publisher. That SourcePoint at the time, I mean, they weren't tiny, they weren't super huge, they were kind of in the middle. They were very, very proactive at cons. And then unfortunately, life happened and I guess they sold to Dirk Manning. And I wish them all the best.
We talked a little bit about how the indie comics community is overall pretty supportive of each other. It's always been my contention that we all have kind of a piece of the answers to how to do this. And so, for instance, one of the tips that you gave me, Edward, that I just recently did was, and it hadn't ever occurred to me to do this before we talked about this, was getting CGC copies, getting your book slabbed, because there is a collector's market out there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
It's something, it happened very much by accident. I was at San Diego Comic-Con, I went by the CGC booth and I had a backpack full of copies of the first issue of my book, and I just went up to them and said, hey, would you guys grade this? And they said, yeah, we'll grade it as long as it's not offensive. And they set me up with an artist account, and then I put the CGCs on my table, and I had new eyes that would have completely passed by my table otherwise.
Yeah.
Because they see, oh, you have a graded book. I collect graded books. There's people that collect just high graded. They're not looking for any title.
When
They
you
want
say high grade, what is that, like 9?
like 9 9s and
Okay.
10s. 9 8s are a strong grade, but 9 9s and 10s are very rare. So you have people that will buy any book that gets that particular grade. So
And how much are they willing to spend?
I've sold a 9 9 for $300.
Wow.
And I put a higher price because if I'm stuck with them, I'm not going to be upset. So I put a price that says, okay, this is how much I'm willing to part with it for, because it's meaningful for me too, as just a collector myself. But having those things, I just have a rack of CGC books, and you'll get a pause from so many different people. And I have several readers who have multiple CGC books from me and have never read my series.
Right. And that's the kind of thing too, is that, sometimes the profit margins of doing cons can be razor thin, and if you sell one of those books or two of those books, that can make all the difference between making a profit or not, really. Real quick, I want to start and go down the line. I know we advertise tips and tricks. So what are your top tips for writing indie comics? Yeah, with you.
Maybe the first guy think about.
I think my first suggestion would be a craft one, which is always think about the structure of the story you're telling, specifically the page turns. I think that's something that's very difficult for people who have not written comics before to understand, that like you have to put whatever the big piece of information or the big reveal on the top left page, part of the page.
Right. And odd pages, even pages.
Yes,
like
even pages.
The page turn has to reveal the surprise, and it's a major surprise.
Yeah, totally. Or even if it's not a major surprise, maybe it's sometimes like you're just shifting location, and like that, it's gonna existentially feel like a new setting if you're shifting from the bottom right of one location and you turn the page and I go to a new location that feels smoother,
Hard to have two locations on one page. You can do it,
Yeah.
but it's a little
It's weird.
awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that makes me think too. It's like each snapshot, each panel, not only do you have to give them a reason to turn the page, you also have to give them a reason to look at that very next panel,
Totally.
right? And guide them where you want their eyes to be for every panel through the entire story, really.
So coming back, one thing I said, get good comic writing software. So I used to use Celtex, which is a screenwriting software, which also did comics as well. Sadly, they went out of business, but it just made the process for the user that was writing comics. It's very like, you got panels, the page breakdowns. It's a little bit different from traditional prose or even screenwriting. So the one I use now is called Script. It's a digital screenwriting software. It's totally free. And it just makes it so that way when you're hitting enter whatnot, you just create your panel, so it makes the writing process more smoother. The second thing I'll say is that as a writer, you need to study your craft. So read writing books. Because those still apply to comics. So there are a couple that I like Stephen King's on writing, which is gives great advice about approaching dialogue and story structure and things along those lines. So I'll just say study your craft. It's like give them a couple writing books that will kind of help you in your process.
They got Kate's adverbs.
Yeah.
He's just like dogging on adverbs.
You know, it's funny you say that, because I had a conversation with, I guess with Con, David Lucarelli, this is an aside, but he's a great writer, he's written some comics as well, he created The Trouble with Tribbles. He was talking about, and Sleestak, but he was talking about how much Stephen King hates adverbs, and he goes, but you know what? There's a difference between placing a coffee mug on the table and placing it on the table gently. And that's why you need adverbs.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
That's funny. Also, understanding comics. Scott McCloud's kind of, really breaks down the minutia of how comics work and how your brain kind of fills in what happens in the other panels and how you should choose each sort of snapshot in time to make that make sense.
And then one more recommendation is still up. Even though I don't agree with a lot of things on the stage, Chuck Dixon, a comic writer, has his website, and he gives a guy that reads advice for comic writers on how to do, for example, a multi-issue like storyline. So there's a lot of things I've learned from his about like the page breakdowns, like make sure that panel has the finger, things like that are on his website. So even though he's kind of there's a lot of great advice on there.
Separate the art from the artist, or in this case, the wildly radical, insane person from the Robin comics. Those Robin comics are real good.
That 91 was dope.
Dude, that 91 was Tommy, wait, not Tommy Daniel. McDaniel?
Scott McDaniel.
Scott McDaniel, thank you. Yeah.
Jim Casada has been doing a Substack recently where he breaks down a lot of the visual language of comics in a really knowing but easy to understand way, articulating a lot of things I thought but never articulated quite as well as him, so definitely worth checking out.
In addressing the changing scenes in one page, I've actually done that, but it's only if the changing scenes are intrinsically related to each other and have a purpose.
Like intercutting or?
It's like it's an intercut
Yeah.
but they have a relationship. What's going on here has a direct relationship to here, to here, to here, to here. Yeah, and that works really well. The other thing is about respecting your artist and what they do. And one, make sure you pay them. I can't say that enough. And pay them on time. But be willing to change, to rewrite, to fit something that if your artist has done this beautiful panel or panels, but your verbiage doesn't fit anymore, and you don't want to cover up this beautiful art, be willing to do the hack and slash or move things around so you don't ruin it, because you hire an artist for a reason, and that's to be an artist.
Yeah.
So let them be an artist and don't cover it up with 50 words.
I completely agree. I think of myself as like a beleaguered 1930s screenwriter in service of some sort of ice queen movie star where I'm constantly just like, whatever you want, yeah. No, you want to draw horses? Oh my god, I just this great idea for a horse scene. And like the work you get when you approach it with that, it just inherently becomes so much better than if you're like dictatorial or no, we must draw the cathedral exploding.
Right.
Yeah.
I break down my scripts by panel, but always with a caveat to my artist that if you can think of a better way
Absolutely.
to break this down, then you obviously have a better visual sense than I do. And I think I would assume all of us probably always reserve a final rewrite for after we get the art, because sometimes the words become redundant because the artist has captured so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even tell you how many times I'm doing, as art comes in, I'm rewriting.
Yeah.
And then as coloring comes in, I'm rewriting.
Okay.
And then I do a final rewrite. So,
How many drafts do you do typically?
uh,
Or is it not a full draft? You're just kind of like moving things around.
I do the initial script, give it to the artist, and then as it comes in, I'll tweak things as they come in. So I don't even think I can actually count how many
Yeah.
drafts, because I'll go back and look, and sometimes, and then I'll go and do a full couple passes before I hand it to the letterer. I mean, and that's even after the colorist, because I don't use, and this, respect your letterer,
Yeah.
because they can actually make or break your comic. People do not understand how important letterers are.
Totally.
And yeah, you just don't use them as your editing software.
And if you're a writer beginning to work with artists, the one question I always ask, shout out to my good friend James Freddy told me this, ask them what do they like to draw and what do they not like to draw. Ask that at the very beginning, because that gives you a sense of like who you're working with and like what story you want to put in front of them. Because the more excited the artist is to draw it, as Dave just said, the better it's going to be. But again, if they say they hate drawing robots and you just gave them your Transformers style fanfic, it's going to be bad. So again, just ask that question ahead of time and you save yourself a lot of work.
Yeah, there's only a few times that I've worked with a writer, an artist I didn't know, and it was on some licensed books. And I personally didn't tell. Like, I could just look at the page and be like, yeah, this is a person who's just like executing a script that someone else wrote. And I tried my best. I read a bunch of their stuff, but the publisher did not want us to speak to each other for whatever reason.
Oh, wow. That's not.
It was really, I was not happy about that process. Yeah.
Yeah.
A different story, like, piggyback of that when I'm working with Godzilla, really, I'm very heavily influenced by, like, Japanese manga, like, anime already. Artists I work with, Winston, he got my script, and the script being, like, cool about the script is, it's a conversation between you and the artist from my approach. So I'm putting in there, like, writing things like, oh, we're gonna draw the scene, but it's something like the scene from One Piece and blah, blah, blah. Just like to the artist get where I'm coming from. And then, literally, he read the script, and he emailed us back and was like, hey, I want to draw this issue with dark greens. I was like, huh? And he said, the staff was like, oh, he gets what I'm doing here. He's also a manga fan himself, and he knows exactly what we're going for here. This is the reason why the issue came out so well. So again, to Dave's point, like, communicate with your artist. Again, when you give them what they like to draw, it's going to make all your work shine.
Do you have any other tips?
I think if you're trying to start writing comic scripts, you need to find a format that works for you, because unlike screenwriting, there is no universal comic scripting format. So I scoured through all of these deluxe editions of different comic writers, and they have those script excerpts in the back, and just found a style that worked for you. And then I just started adapting everything into comic script, just to practice the art of the paneling that I wanted to do. So I took a Grimm fairy tale and adapted that. I took a song and adapted that, and just wrote comic scripts that would never go anywhere, but just to get it to where I knew how I wanted to do the format. And then I hired an editor, because I hired someone who was specifically a comic book editor, so he knows about things like the page turns. Because when I got my first note back, he goes, this is a garbage page turn. It's like, what's that even mean? I said, you got to elaborate on that, because I'm new to comics. And he explained it, and having someone who had been editing comics for the last 15 years, he was able to guide it and make the process go even smoother.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing you can do is you can like take one of your favorite comics and reverse engineer it and turn it back into a script. And you know what that does is it kind of forces you to look at why the artist and the writers made the choices that they made, and you can, you know, and it gets you thinking too, like could they have made other choices? Were the choices they made the strongest possible choices? Is there a weak link here where, you know, they knew there was a problem, and you know, if you just read the comic, you probably don't notice it. But if you break it down, you start to notice that every chain has their weak links. And you know, in terms of programs to use, there's a cheap program, I think it's maybe $40, called Comic Life, which is just, it's not quite professional lettering software by any means, but if I'm just doing like a very, very rough draft of an idea, and I want to see how it's going to, the words and the pictures are going to fit together, I can do that just as a rough sketch before I even hand the script over to my artist. The other thing is that, and I say this every panel, so apologies if the biggest panel is redundant. Neil Gaiman asked Alan Moore how to write comics, and the one tip that Alan Moore gave him came from Mort Weisinger in the 50s, which is if you want a balance between the art and the pictures, you never want to have more than 210 words per page subdivided by panel. So if you have about 35 words per panel on a five-panel page. Do the math, it pretty much works out. And I figured if it's a good enough tip that Alan Moore is sitting there counting the words per panel and feeling free to pass it on to the guy like Neil Gaiman, it's probably worth considering. One other thought I had too is, and this goes for screenwriting as well as comics, but if you're telling a long, complicated, multi-issue story, or graphic novel, you probably know some of the things that are going to happen in the story before you begin. You probably have certain scenes in your head, but you may not know all of the scenes that are going to happen. You may not know exactly what order those scenes need to happen in to make sense. So one of the things that you can do is you can write down this needs to happen in the scene on an index card. And the reason why that's helpful is it's very easy to shuffle and add and delete and reconfigure index cards until you can, read them in order and go, oh, that makes sense, and I have all the scenes I need to tell a story.
I like that because I use notebooks and then I got to dig through and see which notebook did I write that particular note in. So I'm stealing that idea.
Go for it. Yeah. All right, so we've got about 14 minutes left. By the way, this is where you can find all of us. Dave Baker has a booth with your partner,
Nicole Gu.
yeah, and Johnny Parker, your Nico Comics, and 14,
Small press.
and Boston Metaphysical Society, L03. Edward and I are just walking around here, but this is our contact info if you have any questions. And if you have any questions for us right here, right now, we'd love to give you a bag of free comics. Yes?
I mean, you guys talk about how important it is to have the right publisher, the right artists that you're going to be able to work. How did you find your editor, artists? Like, how do you vet those people? I imagine some of it's networking, but how did you find the right person to do your lettering, your art that got your vision?
So for me, one of my searches, like for example, for artists, we have Instagram, we have DeviantArt and things like that. And so at that point, we just like cold emailing, cold calling like artists on DeviantArt. They actually post a forum like for your project, like I'm looking for artists to draw X, Y, and Z for this amount. So I went about those things, like to find my artists. My advice would be if you want to run that route, though, is also to make sure you protect yourself. So there's one, make sure you have a contract that stipulates that it's work for hire, rights, et cetera, and then also just never get money up front. Like, if you just want to get like ripped off or anything like that. But the cool thing about online is you can find a variety of artists from like different places and find different collaborators. As I said, Winston is actually over in London. Because I collaborate with guys that work. So the cool thing is you get to collaborate with people from across the world.
As far as figuring out what publishers you want to work for, I think there's something to be said for looking at the roster of artists that work at various publishers and being like, oh, I fit in with this group of people, or oh, I want to be in that group. I don't know that I fully fit in, or no, I don't want to hang out with those guys. And typically, no, I don't want to hang out with those guys are the publishers that, from my perspective, it's pretty easy to avoid them. And like I said previously, it is 50-50 contracts. They publish books that are, stereotypically speaking, movie pitches made into a 6-issue miniseries, and they have a very booky genre bending of like, it's a guy and he fights werewolves, and maybe we could cast Pedro Pascal? Like, for me personally, nothing against werewolves, I love them. But that type of cynical, craven approach to making art doesn't yield anything other than, things that end up as door stoppers in production companies in West Hollywood. And that's not something I'm interested in. I like the medium of comics. I value the medium and the history and the people who've been inside it. And I think you can spot a mile away a publisher that values that and is really trying to push that forward versus the inelegant dance between commerce and art. I understand we all need to make money, options and movie deals, keep publishers afloat. Everybody does it. But there's a way of doing it that I feel like still keeps the core of the reason that I personally am drawn to this medium versus a more cynical approach.
Yeah, I would be, take your time. Don't feel like you absolutely, if anyone's trying to rush you, you need to run the other way. Like I mentioned before, find a good lawyer to protect yourself. And for those of you who haven't, comic yet, more than likely most of you are going to self-publish first. That's just the way of it. And that will prove to people that you can accomplish something, that you can finish, and they can see your work and see how you do it. It's your resume, for lack of a better term. And if someone, picks it up later, like they did with me, great. And if they don't, you also have other platforms you can utilize, like Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms to help build notice.
And you wrote a book about
I
this.
actually wrote a book, yes. It's got Kickstarter for the independent creator. One caveat, it has not been updated for a few years, but the strategies are still sound. Just a reference material is a bit outdated because the platform itself has evolved quite a bit.
You have a book on your table about kickstarting your comic, right?
Yeah, Kickstarter hired my partner to make a promotional, like, this is how you do it thing.
Oh, yeah, we talked about it at the lunch.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
I think make sure you vet whoever you get, because if you create an account that starts showing art for a comic that you're going to create, you're going to get your inbox flooded with people saying, I'm an artist and I want to work with you. Half of them are just AI bots,
Yeah.
and they'll still take your money. So make sure that you talk to a few other creators to go, hey, have you worked with this person? Ask them for a list of credits that they've done so that you can make sure that this is an actual human you're working with and actually someone who's going to draw it themselves and not just generate your script through AI. So getting a few people to vouch for them is very important because, oh my gosh, 5 to 10 messages every day. I'm an artist. I really want to work with you.
I'm getting that. I just automatically delete that
Yeah.
because I know it's a bot. Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is, like, this sounds like a really simple thing, but, like, becoming a part of the culture in terms of just, like, watching comics YouTube channels, listening to comics podcasts, that are kind of centered in whatever the niche that you want to write in is super helpful. Mostly because you get a sense of what other people are doing, you get a crash course of education of what's happening on the ground, and a lot of times you just find out about projects where you're like, oh, that's kind of similar to what I was doing. I'm going to look that up. Oh, wow, actually, that's like a really good idea. There's things I can learn from this. And
Or you can find out about anthologies, which is a
Yes.
great way to break in.
Totally. Yeah.
The one thing I would say about artists is there are a lot of artists out there that can do beautiful work in terms of covers and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they can tell a story.
Yeah.
So you want to look at sequential art, preferably look at it without even reading the dialogue and captions and see if you can tell what story the artist is telling without any of that stuff. And don't forget to come get your bag 3 times.
I can spoke with you.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, what are some like comic YouTube channels you'd recommend?
So podcasts and YouTube channels, I would say Matt with 4 T's. If you haven't read that or watched those videos, they're amazing. It's just
Sorry, what's
Matt.
that?
What is his name?
Matt with 4 T's, Matt. They're long-form, hour-long video explainers about comics history and people who work in comics. There's a really good one about Ed Brubaker that was just put up a couple days ago.
Is that the one where he talks about like getting kicked out of the Winter Soldier?
Yep.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. Those videos that he makes are great. As far as podcasts, Off Panel by David Harper, I think is an amazing podcast, and his comics digital journalism website, Sketch, is really good. They do all kinds of deep dives. Like they did a oral history of Marvel's Secret Wars, so they interviewed Hickman and Freeport and a bunch of people that worked on it. It was very educational about like the internal politics of Marvel at that time. There's tons of stuff out there. It's just dependent on whatever the niche is that you're trying to write. If somebody wants to start a YA teen romance podcast, I'm available and I would like to do that because I'm doing after this. Yes?
One of the things I'm curious about, you sort of touched upon it already, as independents, how do you handle the challenges of having somebody else, some other entities, adapt your work for other media, whether it be animation, games, whatever, and along the same lines, how do you protect yourself from having your work being pirated by AI?
Well, the AI thing, I think, is currently up for debate if we even are capable of that. I know my books have been already scraped, like, you know, and I don't know if I'm going to have a legal recourse. We'll see. In terms of adaptations, I've only optioned one project, but it was a big option. I optioned it to J.J. Abrams, and it went through the process, and that was a very educational experience, but ultimately didn't get made. So I look forward to having the problems of how do you deal with it when there's all this money and the accolades. Oh man, yeah. Not currently my burden, but I look forward to it, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack, you know. I mean, making comics is not easy, and indie comics is not a high profit margin thing to do. But I think becoming the next Robert Kirkman and is kind of akin to winning the lottery. It could happen to you, but the odds are not high.
I will say, I've been approached by multiple people asking to option the books, and I have not done those because that's the point of why we want to own things, is so we can say no when it's a person who, maybe they're at the beginning of their creative journey, and maybe at a later point in time it would be a worthy discussion, but right now it's not that point. But it's kind of hard to say no to Mr. Star Wars when you shake his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mentioned before, is taking your time. I mean, I've had producers circling around my projects for years now, but I just haven't found the right partner. And I'm much more willing to wait to find the right partner that is willing to do it the way I want to do it and respect my work and the work of my artists, rather than to rush into anything. I will say I am also in a very privileged position in that I don't have to worry about, bringing in the rent and all that other good stuff and paying for stuff. So I understand people who, the rent is due and things need to be paid, and sometimes you need to do this stuff that may not be perfect. So I respect that decision, but just make sure you have really good legal representation to protect you.
Yeah.
All my stuff is copyrighted. Boston Metaphysical Society is trademarked. So if you have the funding to be able to do that, please do that. So at least you have lawyers will not represent you pro bono unless your work is copyrighted.
Yeah. I was pretty shocked too, like when they said, oh, J.J. Abrams is gonna, my agent called me, he was like, J.J. Abrams is gonna option the book. I was like, this is amazing. And then the offer came, and I was almost on the verge of tears, because it was the worst thing I have ever seen. And my agent had to call me and be like, no, this is the process. They're giving you a terrible deal, and then we have a team, and now everybody negotiates for like a year and a half. And like, nobody told me that. And so I didn't know. So I was just like, oh my God, this is the choice? We like sell our book down the river, or we, I guess, don't, and then live with this thing hanging over your head forever? And thankfully, I had a very fancy lawyer, and that didn't happen. But I didn't know that, and so that, like I said, it was a very educational experience.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you would think, just to save time, you give the person at least a halfway decent deal, and then you save 6 months of time, bringing it down to the final nuances and final points. Instead of starting at this and then having a year and a half to bring it to here, I mean, that's
and
crazy.
he was so sweet too. Like he bought the book at a local comic book store, and then we were at the store and we talked to him and the guy from Heroes, Greg something, I can't think of his last name. Greg Grunwald, maybe. They're like friends in real life, so they were just there like the next week when we were there, my partner and Paul, and like we talked to him, and like all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, JJ's gonna be with our friends, invite me to the office. Like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And then that deal showed up, and I was like, what is going on? And not that Hollywood is two-faced, but there's just mechanisms that if you understand the callousness of them, I think you don't get hurt in the way that I was maybe a little jarred by that process.
Oh, particularly, it's like, oh, well, it's just a shopping agreement. It's like, no, it's not just a shopping agreement.
Totally.
It's that you're asking for like 50% of the media rights. You're asking for manufacturing the toys, everything, and it's like, So, yeah, gotta get a lawyer.
Well, on that note, it's 2:50, so we've got to clear out of here. But if you ask a question, please come take a bag of comments. And if you have any more questions, we can, or at least I can hang out outside and for a little bit and answer your questions.